this section, we look at the emotional impact that comes from living with a learning difference, such as dyslexia. Neil Mackay, who's an international dyslexia expert, he actually calls this emotional impact learning stress. So in this section, we're going to cover what exactly is learning stress and how it's created. As parents and caregivers, it's important we understand what this is, and you will likely already be noticing this learning stress happening for your children. We also look more in depth at the impact of anxiety on the brain's ability to engage in learning. So we know that a person with a learning difference has a brain that processes and thinks about information in a different way. And this works well until they get into certain environments, such as school, early childhood, socializing situations, or sometimes at home. Being in these environments place demands on the areas that a person with a learning difference struggles with the most. That's their poor short-term memory, their poor ordering and sequencing of information, and their processing of verbal information. And if you think about it further, this is quite often how schools teach our children. They put demands on their short-term memory, they have to process all this verbal information, and they have to order and sequence their thoughts and ideas down on paper and for writing. This turns a learning difference into a learning difficulty. And this learning difficulty creates this learning stress. The learning stress is made up of low self-esteem, frustration, and heightened anxiety around learning. Low self-esteem affects their motivation to engage with their learning. Frustration can come from seeing how hard they have to work compared to their peers. And with anxiety, as part of learning stress, we need to understand anxiety is normal. It's a normal body response when we're feeling safe or uncomfortable. But for our children with learning differences, it happens more often, especially with their learning. So we're going to look at anxiety in more detail now. As I mentioned, anxiety is a normal process, and it is when our brain wants to take us away from what it sees as an unsafe or uncomfortable situation. It's beneficial when we need to get away from dangerous situations. It's the fight, flight, freeze response we have. However, for people with a learning difference, this response happens more frequently, especially in learning situations, such as at school or when they're in new environments. We're going to look at the process of anxiety, as anxiety is the outcome you see. It actually sits on feelings of being scared or fearful that they're going to look dumb or get it wrong at school or in these new environments. One of the strongest coping strategies dyslexics have is masking their struggles. They don't want anyone to know they can't do it or that they can't do it easily. So they worry. They worry that they will be found out. They go to school, for example, and they worry about, will I know what to do? Will I be able to keep up with the teacher? Will I know how to answer that question? Then a situation happens where they can't manage and they feel like they're going to be unmasked and their anxiety spikes. When this happens, there is a chemical reaction in the brain. This bunch of chemicals including cortisol, floods into the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain. With this cortisol there, the brain is not capable of rational thought until it reduces. And this can take about half an hour. We talk about it as the brain going offline or going blank, because that's what it feels like. When a person's brain is offline, they're not capable of taking in new information or being able to show what they know. And this is the impact on the learning. The child can't take in information from the teacher, and they can't show the teacher what they know because their brain is offline with anxiety. In our work, these are actions or situations that can cause a child's brain to go offline. One of the main ones is a growly voice, especially if it's in a teacher-student situation. It can also come from not knowing how to form their letters when they're writing, like J or G. Or it can come from not knowing how to spell a word. Anything with a time limit can make their brain go offline, or just hearing the word test can do it. Being given too much information at once, for example, some verbal instructions, or it can be visually too if they're perhaps given a worksheet with too much writing on it, can also make their brain go offline. So Neil Mackay, this UK dyslexic expert, has stated this learning stress, which is made up of the frustration and the low self-esteem and heightened anxiety, ends up being a bigger impact on a child's academic process. He says up to 80% of a learning difference is this learning stress, this emotional part. So for parents and caregivers, this is really important to know, as we often feel like it's hard to support a child's academic progress if we're not a teacher. However, with this learning stress being 80%, it's in this area we can support our child or our children. And the improvement by improving self-esteem, reducing frustration, and managing anxiety will flow through into their school learning. By reducing their chances of their brains going offline, they're going to have better opportunities to take in the learning and to show what they know.